Dave Smith tried debating Iran's nukes with a literal Iranian activist, and it went exactly how you'd expect. Misinformation, deflection, and then a full-blown unraveling. I'm reacting to every second.
I mean, I think that I think essentially your question is all flawed. I mean, even in the IAEA report that you're referring to, they also reiterated that Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb and that they have not made the decision to start pursuing one. And so there was no imminent threat. Listen, even Benjamin Netanyahu, in his interview with Brett Baer, who always, Piers, as you know, has a long history of just making up how long the Iranians are to developing a nuke, even he said maybe a year, 13 months. But the point is that in order for them to do that, they would have had to kick the inspectors out. And then it would have taken them at least a matter of years to develop a nuclear bomb if they had made the political decision to start seeking one, and then it would have taken them a while to figure out.
Do you think they should have one?
My point.
Do you think Iran should have a nuclear bomb?
No, I don't think anybody should have nuclear weapons.
Right, but do you think in particular Iran should have one, given how much it supports terrorist groups?
Well, I will answer that question. Let me just say the point I was making there is just that there was no imminent threat. We had more than enough time to do what the American legal system requires in this situation, which is that you bring it to Congress so that the people theoretically can have a debate through their representatives.
But actually,
and a declaration
as you know,
of war
David,
can be launched.
I saw AOC making that argument, and I replied to her, almost every military strike ordered by an American president this century has been done without prior congressional approval.
Yeah, but what type of argument is that, Pierce? Every war since World War II has been fought undeclared. That doesn't mean it's the proper legal system.
But the argument is that if you go for congressional approval, inevitably it will leak out and you lose the element of surprise.
Yeah, okay, but then the argument also is that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the founders very intentionally placed war-making power in the Congress because they didn't want it to be, they didn't want the president to have the war-making powers of a king. Now,
yeah, but
listen,
it does commander-in-chief can make military strikes as well. It just can't declare war.
Yeah, well, there's some debate about that amongst constitutional scholars, but yes, but that refers to like an imminent threat, which by all accounts this wasn't. Now, listen, I don't want Iran to get a nuclear weapon. I think that everything that U.S. but basically all of U.S. and Israeli foreign policy seems to have been geared around incentivizing them to make one for about as long as I've been alive, which I think is very counterproductive. But I will say,
I just want to say that's a classic victim. Israel and America are forcing Iran to get nuclear weapons. Israel's the problem. America's the problem. This is so flipped on its head.
That I think there is a couple thoughts here that I think people should really consider. And number one, that I don't, I still think that Donald Trump, as great as it is that he walked us back from this, I think it was totally reckless and wrong for him to launch it to begin with. But think about this. The whole foundational claim for the Hawks' justification about Iran getting a nuke here, because obviously lots of really, really bad people have had nuclear weapons in the history of the world, and that's not a good thing, but like Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong and like, today, current Vladimir Putin, China, I mean, there's lots of really bad regimes that have nuclear weapons. It's almost never been on the table among serious people that we ought to launch a war of aggression and choice because of regime. But the claim here is that Iran is so crazy. There are these religious fundamentalists, and self-preservation simply isn't a motivating factor for them, and therefore they can't be allowed to get it.
But you wouldn't dispute that. You wouldn't dispute though the central argument that Israel has about it, which is that Iran has been the main sponsor for Hamas, the Houthis and Hezbollah for a number of years, all of whom are terror groups wedded to eliminating Israel. You wouldn't dispute that?
I don't dispute that they have supported those groups, and I don't dispute that that's the Israeli claim.
So isn't that right there the existential threat to Israel?
Well, I mean, I'm sorry, but Israel, listen, if Israel is the only country in the Middle East who secretly has nuclear weapons and is not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and they also funded Hamas. So I'm sorry, I do not think it's a legitimate justification for them to launch a war because they claim someone else is making nukes when they're not, and also they also funded Hamas or something like that. So no.
Can I respond to this now? Can I respond to this now? First of all, this claim that there's no evidence that the regime is making nukes is totally false. It's totally false. We know that they've enriched to 60%, which means they're 90% of the way there. There's no reason to have anything above 3 to 5% for civilian use. Everybody understands that 60%, the only purpose of it is for nuclear weapons. Now, for a long time, the US and the Western world have been trying to delay the breakout time. That was the whole point of the JCPOA and all of these other deals, was that we know that they're months away, right? That's why you keep saying, oh, they've been months away for years, right? But they've been trying to extend the breakout time from months away to at least a year away for the past 10 to 15 years. So actually, everybody is fully aware that the regime has always been months away from developing nuclear weapons. Now, second of all, again, it's making these moral equivalencies between the United States or different countries or Israel or whoever having nuclear capabilities. What you're talking about here is a regime whose fundamental motto, its entire basis of existence, is death to Israel and death to the United States. That is what it stands for. That is what its leaders chant on a daily basis. That is what school children have to chant in the playground before they start school every day. Death to America, death to Israel. Every day, their strategy is, how do we destroy the United States and how do we destroy Israel? Now, when you have an expansionist ideology that has eschatological beliefs about the end of the world and the end of Israel, and the desire is to proliferate and export its ideology of velayat fagli, not just to the Middle East, but to the entire world, and you say, I don't understand what's the difference between them having nukes and others having nukes, that is just profoundly misguided. Second of all, I
didn't say that.
And the excellent response by Alec over here.
Second of all, this isn't just about the threat of the nukes themselves. I don't think anyone's thinking to themselves that Iran, that the Islamic Republic's just going to drop a nuke as soon as it has one. The whole point of it reaching nuclear capabilities is that it becomes a deterrent state. Once it becomes a deterrent state, how are you going to deter its bad behaviors? How are you going to prevent its alliances with its regional proxies? How are you going to prevent more October 7th when everything you try to do to sanction them and contain them is met with, what are you going to do? We've got nukes. And it also prevents the containment of the region, because now UAE, Egypt, all of these other countries are so under threat that they also have to develop nuclear capabilities. So it is actually allowing them to get that far. That would be the cause of regional and global instability. So it's just preposterous to say that we should have just done nothing about that or got into another deal that just kicked the can down the road again. We are in the position that we are in because nobody contained this for as many decades as it's been a growing threat. We've passed the Neville Chamberlain moment.
Okay.
Totally. It's just total bullshit. I mean, just listen, the reason why now this 60% enrichment, which obviously for anyone paying attention was, there is another reason besides they were developing a nuclear weapon, which again, all of the intelligence says they had not even made the political decision that they wanted to develop a nuclear weapon yet, let alone weren't doing it. It was a chip to bargain away, which is actually what they were trying to do. They were in the middle of negotiations when Israel snuck attacked them and launched
that means you concede. Hang on. That means you concede that what they were doing was creating the impression that they were going to build a nuclear bomb.
Oh, listen, there's no question that they upped the enrichment. But listen, here's the point. They weren't allowed to, under the JCPOA. Okay. Under the JCPOA, when America was involved, they weren't allowed to enrich to this level, but they were allowed to do it if America pulled out. That's in the JCPOA agreement. And so when Donald Trump tore that up, and walked away, they brought their enrichment up. What were the negotiations, Pierce, that were happening right before Israel launched their surprise attack? It was for Iran to bring the enrichment back down and America to get back in some type of agreement. They weren't going to call it the JCPOA because Donald Trump would have had to make it his own thing and not getting back into Obama's.
Trump gave them 60 days to negotiate. Trump said you got 60 days, and day 61, Israel attacked.
Right. Okay. Now, but what happened, and this was widely reported, and Donald Trump himself acknowledged this, is that the hawks insisted that you put a poison pill in the negotiations. This is what Mark Levin was freaking out about, and that the standard has to be that Iran must give up all nuclear enrichment altogether. This was always a poison pill, so that the point is that Iran was willing to negotiate, and so if you really wanted to get back into that deal, Donald Trump honestly just never should have torn up the JCPOA, and we'd all be in a much better situation. It ushered in a new inspection regime. And so this is why we know that they're enriching up to 60%, because they're still in the agreement and they still have the inspections, unlike Israel.
Let me ask.
Dave Smith actually trusts Iran more than he trusts America. This is like stunningly shocking.
Let me ask you this. I'm sure since you know about the JCPOA, I'm sure you know that it was replete with sunset provisions for up to 10 to 15 years, where all of those containment would be expired, and they would have more than $150 billion to continue developing their missiles and nuclear programs. The JCPOA was never a solution. Not only that, but not only did they inherit more than $100 billion, they were also able to expand their regional terror. And Khamenei repeatedly came on television and said, we are going to use that money to fund our allies. So there was actually a backdoor to the JCPOA where the regime, the Islamic Republic, was able to expand its regional influence and fund its allies, which eventually led to October 7th, which eventually brought us to where we are now. So yes, the JCPOA did intend to temporarily constrain their nuclear abilities, but it was always understood that by the time it expired, they would be $150 billion richer, their proxies would be fortified, they would have been responsible for significant regional destabilization, and then they would be able to enrich if they wanted to. And the only way to prevent that was to get into another nuclear deal, which would require unfreezing hundreds and billions of more. So they would just keep getting enriched, rich and empowered. So the question is, how does this end? Just a lifetime of JCPOAs?
Well, let me ask a question just to end this, because we've run out of time. Dave, hang on. Let me put a question to Dave, which is that if it turns out that all this activity in the last 2 weeks drives Iran to the negotiating table, they do agree to give up a lot of their enriched uranium and so on, reduce it back to civilian levels and so on, and there is a period of sustained peace in the region, and the Gaza hell is brought to an end as well, and in 6 months' time, all this is over. Should Donald Trump get the Nobel Peace Prize? Because Barack Obama got one 8 months into his tenure for basically just doing a bit of fancy chat about world peace.
Well, I guess grading on the Obama curve.
I love this question before even listening to his answer, because it sets Dave Smith up for exposure.
Everybody deserves a Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, literally, the three of us are much better candidates than Barack Obama was. So judging on that curve. No, look, I mean, I think that would be great if that's the result of all of this. I think that what Donald Trump's policy was so reckless, and it had such a risk, and this is what I was trying to get at before that I hope people appreciate. Look, if Iran had not made the calculation to give advanced warning and had just fired off missiles the way they did into Israel. But this is the whole point, Piers.
I think Trump called their bluff. I think Trump called their bluff because he realized that what Israel had done over a period of days is expose the Iranian regime as having a military that was a dud.
Piers,
couldn't even deal with what Israel was flying at.
They don't want to be destroyed. They would rather rule than be destroyed.
Exactly.
But the point is that we put this in the hands of the Iranian government. If they hadn't done that, we may have had to launch a full regime. What would Donald Trump have done if 50 or 100 Americans had been killed in an Iranian attack?
Well, thankfully,
we risked a catastrophe.
Thankfully, that hasn't happened because Iran was so panicky, they actually gave prior warnings to everybody to make sure it didn't happen.
So maybe they're not such a scary threat after all.
Well, that's an interesting point if you take away their nuclear weapons. Alika, final word to you, very quickly.
Yes. Okay.
They're not a scary threat as long as you have smart people who outsmart them. But if you're naive and you continue to feed them, they will be a terribly scary threat. Look what they have caused in the Middle East over the last 2 years.
Your whole point, this whole conversation and everything that you've been saying online is that Israel is engaging in terrorism, ethnic cleansing, all of these things that you claim to be against. And yet you are so happy to engage in these deals that enrich the Islamic Republic and its machinery of oppression to hang and lynch and torture women. So if you're so against what Israel is doing, if you're so against funding what Israel is doing, why are you so happy to fund this regime in its domestic and regional terror by the same means of empowering them with money through the diplomatic?
I know, it's crazy. It's almost like I'm opposing war across the board.
You're opposing war by actually supporting
wars. Why would that be?
So you're opposing war, like by first of all instigating more war down the road. Okay, that's the Neville Chamberlain moment.
Just asserting that it's nonsense.
Second of all,
a prediction of the future is not a fact. Please.
You are happy for Iranians to be slaughtered, raped, killed, and hanged, so long as in your fantasy world you're opposing war, but you're not okay with it in Gaza. But you're not okay with it in Gaza. You're an idiot.
Maybe you got a friend who's better.
The Neville Chamberlain analogy is perfect. So that's exactly what Dave Smith is like, and what many people are like, which is the vast majority of people who do not have the courage to stand up to terror, and therefore what they do is they justify until you have October 7th happening all around the world. And we need leadership to stand up and say, if you represent evil and if you threaten that you're going to, we will attack you before you attack. And that's exactly what the Torah teaches us to do.